Welcome to Mad Men, Men, a podcast dedicated to recapping and analyzing the AMC series Mad Men from the perspective of three wildly different types of watchers. We've got somebody watching the show for the very first time, somebody else who's rewatching for the first time since the series ended back in 2015, 10 years ago. And then there's me, Jon Negroni, or as my co-hosts like to call me, a grimy little podcaster. Joining me as always is Will Ashton, our first-time viewer. And Will, why are we even fighting at work? This is a podcast.
I have been waiting for this moment. Fisticuffs. I've been waiting for this since we reviewed Bohemian Rhapsody.
7 years ago.
Yeah.
And of course, we have Mike Overhulse, our first-time rewatcher. And Mike, you're staring at the bolt of that cosmic bridge a little suspiciously.
I'm just a robot, John. I just do what anyone tells me to do. But I can't decide if that bolt is on or off.
You're not a robot to me, Mike Overhulse. You're so much, you're flesh and blood. You're organic. You're authentic.
There was a part of me when they were talking about Ken's new writing, because the only thing we've known before this is that short story he wrote that's like...
The Vermont one, yeah. With like the maple syrup. Yeah.
It was like semi-autobiographical. I was kind of hoping like they were teasing his new writing career, but it was just like erotic animal fan fiction.
That's where he's going to go in the 70s, yeah.
Like it was like early furry stuff, because Robin Hood would have come out by then, right? The Disney Robin Hood?
No, that was the 70s.
Oh, was that the 70s? I thought that was the 60s.
No.
Then it would have been the Jungle Book, I guess, because that was the 60s. So
well, that was 60s, but not quite yet, because that's like 67, 68.
Right, because if it was that, then that line that Roger has where he's like, my wife loves fur, but you don't see me with a tail would have hit even harder, you know.
Well, today we're talking about season 5, episode 5, which is called Signal 30. And this episode, it aired April 15th, 2012. So we're almost recording on the day of that. So this was 13 years ago, almost. It was written by Matthew Weiner and Frank Pierson, his first and last time co-writing on the show. And yeah, the director of Dog Day Afternoon, and also the late Frank Pierson, unfortunately. He died in 2012. Actually, that same year, he co-wrote this.
No. He was the writer of Dog Day Afternoon. Sidney Lumet.
So the writer, yeah. Sorry. But yeah,
John.
You silly goose.
But this episode was directed by John Slattery.
If only Ken could have written about a very silly goose.
John Slattery, who of course plays Roger Sterling, and his third time directing an episode of Mad Men. So we're going to get into all of that, but first I want to get into your general impressions. Will, this is your first time watching Signal 30, the slow motion car crash of Pete Campbell. What do you think of this episode?
Oof, yeah, this is a rough one for Pete, which may or may not be the reason why I think this is the highlight of season 5 so far. I think this is a very good episode. And I think it mostly comes down, as we were teasing before, to the writing. I think this is easily one of the best scripts that they've had. I think, just having... His name is Frank Pierson, right?
Frank Pierson, yeah.
Yeah, Frank Pierson. Having his, expertise, not only as, one of the great screenwriters, but also his lived-in experience, along with the novelistic qualities that I think Matthew Weiner brings as a writer, just really blend together really well to make probably one of the best structured episodes, one of the best thematic episodes. Yeah, I mean, I think John Slattery does a nice job directing it. I don't think it complements it as well as the writing. It seems like, even though we've complimented his directing in the past, I think, he just kind of needed to guide the vessel with this one. And I think he does a pretty good job on that. I think he's maybe a little blunt, as Matt Zollersleis talks about in his chapter in Mad Men Carousel, which is excellent as well, by the way. I think that's one of his best chapters in the book. Probably fitting, since this is, I think, one of the better episodes. So, yeah, I mean, I think, it's just a really solid episode. It's just nice that I think every storyline, I think, pays off really well. I think it's just, really solid all around.
Yeah, you brought up a few things that I'm itching to get into for sure. Because if I can say one thing about what Slattery does with this script here, this was a treat to listen to the commentaries, because Slattery did one with Matthew Weiner, and he talked about several instances where some of the most blunt stuff that happens is from the script. The point, like for example, when it transitions from Pete to Pete, that was part of the script. There are a lot of like ways things are shot, the dinner scene.
Talk about the adventures of Pete and Pete.
I mean, a masterful show. But no, yeah, like I think that if anything, you could almost say that Slattery was pretty deferential to Frank Pierson, and rightfully so, considering his inexperience.
Yeah, I was thinking more like, you know, Don and Megan banging in the car, followed by the click clack of the typewriter. It was a little on the nose, but it's still kind of fun.
I love noses myself. Mike Overhulse, you're rewatching the show, of course, for the first time. Yeah, do you have a similar sentiment? Sounds like Will's coming out the gate saying this is his highlight of season 5 so far. We're 5 episodes in, almost halfway.
Yeah, I mean, I was really excited for this one. I didn't want to bring it up in previous podcasts to not get Will's expectations up, but this is genuinely, I think, a top 5, maybe even top 3 episode of the whole series for me.
Glad you said that. Episode. I was going to say at least top 10, but I'm glad somebody's at least shooting for top 5. I was scared of saying top 5.
Dude, no, I'll say it. I say it for sure because especially like on a rewatch, just because I think the second time you watch this show, you really pay attention to Pete Campbell a lot more and the journey that he goes on. And this is such a pivotal episode in the life of Pete Campbell, B, in the journey of me, a 29-year-old who has seen myself at different stages of the Pete life cycle within a career. And also just like it hits on all cylinders. Like I think all the stories narratively work really well together, especially compared to last episode that felt clunky and not very so. I think there's humor in this one. I think there are just devastating moments. Like I live for the dinner party alone where Don shows up and it's like the cool kid from your class is there. Like I don't know. I just loved that part of it so much. Like if nothing else in this episode happened and it was just that storyline and some other things, I would still like this episode a lot. So I think there's a lot of things to dig in here. Yeah, love this episode.
The dinner party scene itself took them 8 hours to shoot that. Just at the table, I should say. Not the whole thing, the table. And it kind of goes to show you that Slattery really, he wanted to get it right. And yeah, I gotta say, I think this is the Pete Campbell episode. Not saying like best episode, like the best Pete stuff, but I think if you're looking for an episode about Pete, this really covers it because it's so pivotal to his character. It pays off so many things that have been going on since season 1. The first episode where, it's referenced here when he goes to Don and he's like trying to get him to have dinner with him. And everything with Pete so far has been, I will be happy if I do this. If I get the status at the firm that I want, being head of accounts and doing this and that, having the kid with Trudy so she gets off my back, all this stuff. And he's still not happy. That's the point of this episode. And that's the point of the show. This is what Mad Men does so well, is that it has all these different characters and they're all organically serving the overall plot, which is, what is happiness, right? Happiness is, to Don Draper, advertising, the key to advertising. Well, how do you fill this void in your life? How do you prevent being miserable? And so much of that is covered in this episode with a lot of really great writing. And yeah, I mean, you're right, Will, there are parts of it, they're pretty blunt, the drip, drip, drip and all that stuff. But I will say, I think it's still really satisfying because it's metaphorical in a way that's just, I don't know, it's blunt, like getting hit by Elaine Price, I guess. It's a wake-up call.
Who, I gotta say, I mean, I much like Roger, thought it was going to be a clean win for Lane, but
I had money on Lane.
Yeah. And I also love that, like, Roger in the episode, in that scene, I mean, also kind of has like a meta like director quality to it, where it kind of feels like he's, knowing that Slattery directed the episode kind of just feels like, it's like, well, this is kind of dangerous and bad, but I also just want to see where this goes. And, he's just kind of watching over it, almost putting money on the table.
Well, it's devastating though, right? Where like Pete looks over to these guys that he has deluded himself into thinking are his friends, Bert, peers. Roger, and Don, and they don't help him. And I mean, it's just so emasculating, but also it's this sense of like, I don't have any friends. When Megan tells Don, it's like, your friend is your accountant. That's a tragic way in which Don and Pete are a lot more similar than they realize.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if this happened in your workplace, would someone intervene, or do you think they'd be like, yeah, let's see where it goes?
Oh, for sure. For sure. But I mean, I've been in a work environment, a different work environment, where I got into a fight and nobody intervened. So have I ever told you guys this story? Like when I was working in a kitchen?
No.
So I worked in the Buffalo Wild Wings in college, and I was a cook. And the guy who trained me, we were like, buds at first. But over time, he started to dislike me, and I wasn't sure why. We had a mutual friend, my best friend from high school. They were like good friends or whatever. And I don't know. He just had like an issue with me. But anyway, so I was working one night, and so the guy who trained me, he was dating one of the waitresses, and she and I were kind of like joking around and stuff. And we were playing a song in the kitchen because it was like a rap song. We were always playing rap, like, while cooking and everything. And she didn't understand the lyrics at one point. So she asked me what it was saying. And I said, oh, it's saying, cut a bitch. And then he like walks by. He thinks that I'm calling her a bitch. So he goes over to me unprompted, and he grabbed me and threw me across the kitchen. And like everyone just kind of like, there were only a few other people, but everyone just kind of stared. And so then I got up, and then I just pretended like it didn't happen. Like I didn't say or do anything about it. And then he left. So he got fired the next day. And then there became like this faction of people who thought I ratted him out or whatever. And a bunch of people, most people were like, that was super fucked up. Like, he didn't deserve that, especially because the waitress herself like defended me and was like, hey, no, that was like totally uncool. John didn't do anything. And so, but then I got in trouble because I didn't tell anybody about it. But I mean, like, what? No, like, I'm not a rat. Get out of here. But yeah.
Did anybody in the restaurant see it and go, check,
no.
please?
Check on that guy, please.
Yeah.
Too bad he doesn't have wings. The Buffalo Wild Wings. So yeah, Signal 30. There's I don't know how to transition out of that.
Of the fight, like the fight's great. The way Lane fights is great. Them wanting to watch the fight is great. Like the silence of just like Don, like watching, and then just
when he closes the curtain.
It's so
look on his face. Like you can't believe it.
For me, the funniest part though is Peggy's face in the doorway afterwards of like the horror of what she saw, realizing that she's not supposed to reveal she knows what just happened, and then just like turning and walking away.
Yeah.
Like it was all great.
Yep. Yeah. It mirrors playfully the suitcase a whole season ago, because Don also lost a fight in the office against somebody that he disrespected and, who disrespected him back. And again, it's like one of those things where like Don and Pete are so much more similar than they realize. Pete is saying like, we're not supposed to fight at work. Don's like, well, sometimes.
The only thing I was going to say about Buffalo Wild Wings was that I think things would have been a lot better for the account and for the guy's marriage if they took that Jaguar guy to a nice lunch at Buffalo Wild Wings where he could exercise his masculinity without being promiscuous and adulterous.
Absolutely one of the best lines of the show is, because he was found with bubblegum on his penis.
Yeah, such a great line.
That's such a Frank Pierson line, if there ever was one. Attica. So yeah, the episode is called Signal 30. Did either of you know what Signal 30 was before you watched the episode?
I mean, I know of it. Like, I know, like that's kind of a notorious film,
Yes.
I never actually took driver ed, so I never watched that. I don't know. Do they still show that?
No, absolutely not.
Well,
so. it was made in 1959.
Right, but don't they show crash footage still?
In my driver's ed, there was like these scenario videos that you'd had to watch, but then like in one of them, it was just like a lady with a bunch of tables in her van.
Of course, yeah.
And like she just kept talking, like in every video, she's talking about all these tables and like so then like renting them out, and like one of them like had a mark on it, so she wouldn't be able to get a refund. It was crazy.
But also you could read into, it's called Signal 30. This is the signal that Pete is 30. You could play with that if you want to. But no, in a literal way, it is referencing the real life driver's ed film. Again, 1959. And it shows all these fatal car crashes. We get like a glimpse of it, right? And like the text comes on the screen. I paused it a couple times because I just kept wanting to read it. But it was basically used to scare a bunch of teenagers into driving safely and all that.
I mean, we were talking about great comedic moments. This episode starts off like lightning with, you have this like horrible crash footage, these like half horrified, half disinterested teenagers. And then the camera pans over to Pete in a full suit, yucking it up to himself. Like I was watching Roadhouse last night, just like, just having fun and just like treating it like, it's just like a night at the Apollo. That was
dude.
Awesome. Yeah.
Such a fun reveal. I literally thought the first time it was going to be Sally for some reason.
That's what I thought too.
They're showing this to her kind of early, but whatever. I don't know what the driving age is in the 50s, but it's such a good reveal.
Well, it tells you the grossness too of like Pete, because clearly that that girl is in high school, and he's like, of course, like she's not going to be that much older than Sally. And Pete is, of course, dressing her down and stuff. It's super gross. And he has this like whole rapport with her, and it's so sad and pathetic. But I was going to ask you guys, right? Because I think this, to me, it's one of the best Mad Men episodes for showing how emasculated Pete feels, right? Like we were saying. But, not just at work. It's usually work where this stuff is happening, but also his job. He can't, at the home, like he can't even fix a sink. The sink clearly is like a metaphor for like, he thinks he's going to fix his happiness, but it's just a coincidence if something makes him kind of happy. And even when he does succeed, he wins over Don at one point. He does impress the girl at one point. It doesn't really amount to anything. He just fails and fails and fails. So why do you guys, I guess we'll start with Will, like why do you think Pete tries so hard in this episode? What do you actually think he's trying to fix in his life?
Well, I mean, I think there's just that void, I guess. And I feel like a lot of people, I'm not trying to be, speculative here, but I think there's a certain point when you get older that you're like, oh, okay, like you're kind of hitting all the benchmarks, but there's still like, I don't feel like I'm there yet. Like, I don't feel like I've hit that like crescendo. I don't feel like my parents yet. And I feel like Pete's kind of at that point where he's married, he's in the suburbs, he is,
he's in Connecticut,
daughter,
Cobb.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a father, of 2 children technically, but only knows of one.
He may be his father, but he ain't his daddy.
Right. And I mean, yeah, there is also that kind of resentment of like, he had kind of a weird relationship with his parents. He lost his dad early in that plane crash. But I think more directly, it's just that Pete wants to he's always been someone who wanted to kind of move up the elevator to status. And I feel like even though he's made significant strides to be a respectful, mindful part of the office, he still wants to be like a peer. Like he wants to be on the same level as Roger and Don and, the rest, Lane and all that. And I think you see that throughout this episode when like he's seemingly at his happiest when he's like buddying with Roger, who he's been pretty contemptuous with throughout most of the second half of the series at this point. And, like he's trying to like act like one of the boys and like go to the, the brothel and like kind of like act it up. And he's still not quite there, even to the point where he's like, the only thing we really see of that interaction is him like assuming an identity for this sex worker. It's not like him like, doing anything really philanderous to be in a direct way. But yeah, I think it's just that like nagging like drip that you see throughout throughout the episode. It's just that sense of like he knows he's missing something, but he seems like he has everything. And yet there is that nagging feeling of like something's not quite fixed, something's not quite there.
Yeah, he says he hears the drip, and Trudy's like, I don't hear it. And it's like such a line to kind of set up the whole episode. Do you agree with a lot of that, Mike? Or you were shaking your head a lot, and I think you gave Will the middle finger once or twice.
Yeah, 4 times actually.
Oh wow.
I think for Pete, I think it's a couple things. Obviously, at the core of it is that he doesn't feel important. That's why that's the mode he goes to with the sex worker. Like that's the version he says okay to. Another really funny scene of him going, nope, that'll do, or that'll work. But I think really like
very Slattery. I will say that line delivery.
They said that in the commentary. Vincent Kartheiser and Aaron Stanton, who plays Ken Cosgrove, he was like, "Oh, that's Roger. That's John Slattery." Yeah.
Anyway, sorry to interrupt, Mike.
Totally okay. But I think a big thing for Pete is like, in something like I empathize with for my own life, is like he got somewhere pretty young, and all of his peers are like older than him or had to like honestly like do more work to get to where he got naturally on his family name. Like we know that's why he had the job he got originally in season 1 and why he couldn't be fired. But I think it's like it was his biggest help to get to where he is and start, but it's also the thing that hurt him the most, because now he's just this young guy. He doesn't actually feel like he himself brings any value, like internally. And so he thinks, okay, but like I can earn the respect of these guys. I just have to get the promotion. I have to have like the role. Like he just gets this destination addiction. And I think this is, to bring in the metaphor of Signal 30, destination addiction. Like, he's been driving the car and he's on that road and he's got to his destination and it's actually a car crash because none of it actually matters because he never actually dealt with what really mattered, which was who he is. Like, he has no like idea what happiness means to him. It's just been career and accolades. But Pete Campbell doesn't know what Pete Campbell actually wants, and I think that's his biggest issue.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think there's a reason why Ken writes the short story at the end, The Man with the Miniature Orchestra, which is really about Pete. It's kind of funny how Ken writes, like, there are two stories that are mentioned in this that are very much about Pete, the robot who, controls the bridge. And that's how Pete sees himself. And it's so interesting how Ken absorbs all that information from the dinner party and it shows up in that entire like short story monologue at the end. It's beautifully done by the episode. And
well, I don't think he's like being shy about it being about Pete, right? He literally names it the Algonquin, which is like a joke from the dinner party about the town he lives in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like clearly like he's a writer in the sense where he's observant. And he has graduated into this form where he's not writing just about himself anymore. He's writing about what he observes in other people. And I think that's, to me, the mark, right, of somebody who really understands their place. And I think you can even read into it that, he sees himself as the robot too. It's not just Pete. But I think, again, it's one of those things where it's characters not realizing they have more in common than they think. But I think to the overall point too, especially what you're getting at, Mike, is that it's so clear, like there are two moments in this episode that really sum up why Pete struggles the way he does. And it's because deep down, he wants to be the most interesting guy in the room. And even when he's hosting his own party, even when he's in control of the whole situation, Don is the one who is, everybody is admiring and kind of like interested in what he has to say, and Ken is the one who has the interesting, creative writing on the side. Hence, Pete sells him out to Roger and tells Roger that, he has this stuff going on. And then also when, he's talking up this girl and in his driver's ed class, grooming, another word for it. And this guy who's literally named Handsome, super blunt, walks in and immediately Pete is able to see, oh, this is how she acts when she's actually interested in a guy. She's kind of nervous. Whereas with Pete, she had her guard down. She was more forthcoming. And there was this whole song and dance that Pete was engaged in, but she was never really interested. And I think it's devastating for him because he just can't accept it. It's like the chip and dip scene where that guy kind of comes in and swoons, the girl at the register in a way that Pete couldn't. And he hates it. He hates himself.
Well, I mean, that actually ties to something I think is really prevalent to what you were saying before, which is I think if Pete actually connected with people his age, he would have more direct peers. Like, he's often antagonized the people that are most directly to his age, which would be Peggy and Ken. In this episode, like we see Peggy and Ken have like that little pact still. Like they kind of act like almost like brother and sister, and acknowledge that like they have each other's backs and like, like he reveals that secret to her first in a way that she honors and respects. Like she obviously like looked into it and read the one story, but doesn't spill the beans in the office. And Pete, asserting some false sense of authority, tells it to Roger and just, gets his secret leaked out and all that stuff. And, just undermines Ken during what would have been a character building moment of intimacy. And yeah, I mean, I think that this kind of just shows that like it's often, like I do think there is some sympathy for Pete in this episode and you can feel kind of bad, but he's also a product of his own making. He's someone who kind of made his own problems, actual or not. And, he's someone who probably could resolve them in meaningful and beneficial ways like Don sometimes does. But he just, like we were saying before, he just wants to be the most powerful, the most interesting, the most handsome guy in the room, even when there's literally someone who more handsome named Handsome in the room taking his swagger.
He's deeply flawed, right, but he's sympathetic.
But there's also, I think, the interesting thing about the flirtation with the student is that like he can't act his own age. He's someone who wants to be, you know, older, more mature, more lived in, but also still has like the frat boy 18-year-old mentality, which is, I think,
younger than that. Because there's the episode with the au pair where Trudy's away and he's literally watching cartoons, eating cereal. So like when he's alone, that's who he really is.
Yeah. But
well,
yeah,
boy.
no, I think, yeah. But
he doesn't have a real gun. He has like the BB gun thing.
I mean, I think that's a common problem, is that like they're all kind of men children in certain ways. But I think Pete, more so than the rest, can't really fully be an adult in the way that Don and Roger can be when the moment, you know, calls upon it. And I think that's also part of the reason why he's so deeply unfulfilled in this episode.
I was going to say too that in the commentaries, it was funny when the sync thing happens with Don, and Vincent Kartheiser, who plays Pete, was trying to say to Aaron Stanton, who plays Ken, he was like, yeah, I think, you know, you could kind of see how Pete has sort of grown in a way because, you know, Don, you know, does the sync thing. And I think he looks up to Don. He's glad Don was able to do that. And he doesn't feel jealous. And Ken was kind of like, really? I was waiting for him to be like, you sure about that? You sure about that? He just kind of moves on. But I thought it was kind of funny because I was like, otherwise, like every other thing that Vincent was kind of talking about with the character, I thought was pretty spot on. And, you know, down to, you know, they ask questions like they asked Matthew Weiner, like, oh, was it really Pete who sold out Ken to Roger? And he was like, yeah, Mike Weiner said that is the case. But yeah, in this one instance, I think he was off the mark.
Well, I mean, for that performance to be truly that performance, he can't be fully self-aware, right? There has to still be that naivete.
I like that.
Yeah.
The Lane stuff here, and Lane is such an interesting counter study in masculinity, right? It all culminates in the big fight, but everything that leads up to that, one of my favorite comedic bits in this, probably my favorite, is the smash cut to him in the World Cup. You know, so he's like, I'm not going to have fun. And he's like screaming and yelling. And I was like, oh man, okay. That's fun. That's good. That's nice. But the overall thing with the subplot with Jaguar and, you know, of course, him and Pete having their row, as it were, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening here with Lane. And I guess let's take it to the fight itself. It's one of the most iconic Mad Men scenes. Mike Overhulse, do you think Lane was justified in doing this? Like punching Pete, starting this? Or do you think this is more about Lane's own failure with Jaguar and him not being mature about it? He does get the smoot right after, but it doesn't last.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think Lane's in the wrong. I'm going to be clear on my stance here. I don't think... Especially
like everyone wanted him to do it, but
yeah, I mean, yeah, Pete's annoying. I get that, but no, he definitely like shouldn't have started a fight. It's clearly more about what's going on in Lane, and it's also the same reason that Pete responds the way he does. It's a lot about what's going on with Pete. It's not actually about, they don't give a damn about like actually landing the account of Jaguar. It's nice, like it would be great for them, but it's not like, you know, it's not like they were, you know, maybe a season ago needing all this business to stay afloat, right? So that's not the danger there. I will say I didn't like I think the homo line also like really ate at Lane. I feel like that was the one.
Yeah.
Like, that was the step across the line, because I think then that speaks to the masculinity piece that, oh, he thought I was gay and I wasn't, you know, a man. Which the first time I watched, I didn't actually quite understand. Like, I didn't read that from the situation of the Jaguar guy thinking that about Lane, but the second time watching it, like,
no, I think it's a matter of Lane has secure masculinity. I think a lot of it comes from his upbringing, but the way he deals with his father, and he rejects his father's kind of violent tendencies. But I think that he has a positive view of his worth as a man, but he has very different, you know, failings. But a lot of it's not related to masculinity. A lot of it's related to him failing as a human being. But specifically with masculinity, I think like the homo thing, I think he is just kind of like, what an idiot. But also like, I don't want to be this kind of like rah, like go to the brothel kind of guy. Like, he's engaged with that stuff before, obviously. But I think that he just doesn't have like the same hangups, I guess. And I think that he genuinely was like liking this guy, you know, Edwin. And he's pissed off because to him, it's like they took his friend away and revealed something about him that was like, you know, very, very distressing to Lane, who, you know what, maybe that's another thing this episode about. It's about the power of friendship, guys. That's what would make Pete happy. That's what Lane was trying to find, really. It was not just really an account. He wanted a friend. You know, there's a whole thing with Roger where he's like, what if, you know, do you generally like the guy? And he's like, yeah. And it was kind of sweet and wholesome. That's Lane.
He found no fault with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The guy didn't really open up to Lane, but
Right.
that's not Lane's fault. He tried.
I gotta say, I haven't a complaint in the world.
Right.
Lane will be honest with you. No complaints.
I will say he was a pretty hard guy to read, I think. At least with Lane. Like, I can sympathize with Lane. Not really sure how to play that. You know, I think he would have had an easier time with a different, maybe less stiff-lipped client. But, no, I mean, I think that what you're referring to when Pete comes out right and just says that he thought that he was a homo, that's, I feel like, to me, when you see the room kind of turn against Pete. Because it feels like for that, like, first half of the conversation, they're mostly on Pete's side. Because they're like, what? You know, it's no big deal. You know, we were having fun or whatever. But, like, they're more tact about, like, hey, you know, like, they could have, you know, eased Lane more gently, you know, with that information while still, like, kind of, you know, implying what the issue was. But for Pete to just kind of outright say it and know that that's going to upset Lane as like kind of futile attempt to, like, assert power over him.
Make himself feel better and
right.
bigger.
And I also love that, you know, the way that it's framed with Slattery, where, like, the three of them are on the other side of the table and they're, like, away from Pete, you know, and they're in that. Yeah, I thought that was, you know, subtle but nice framing. But yeah, or I guess rather blocking. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with what you were saying before.
Yeah, I just love what this episode has to say about friendships between men. You know, I have more to say about that, but sorry, Mike, I think you were going to.
Well, if we're going to talk about the power of friendship, let's not forget the fact about the best friendship this episode has to offer, Peggy and Kent in the pack.
That's another great friendship, yeah. It's, like, platonic, and it's always been pretty pure. Like, they just genuinely like each other, you know, without there being any kind of weirdness.
Right, and I think that's what, you know, if Pete was smarter, he would actually have that, you know, with Peggy or with Ken or both of them, but he just can't get out of his own way.
No, that's exactly right. You know, because I think, like, the relationship, for example, between Lane and Roger comes to Lane and Roger, you know, goes to help him with, like, closing this account. And Lane doesn't react to it the way that Pete would, as kind of a threat, as like, oh, you can't do this. He reacts to it as like, thanks for your help. I appreciate it. Like, he's just like a nice guy. But I think Lane just has a healthier view of interacting with other people. The problem that Lane has, though, the conflict he has, is that he just doesn't feel like he's important to the agency anymore. And it's less about because he wants to feel good about himself. It's more about he wants to feel useful to others. He just has a different understanding of, like, what it means to be a man, and what it means to be a man is to be there for other people. And he feels like if he can't do that, then, you know, what is he? And so I think that that's the struggle. Whereas Pete, it's purely selfish. It's purely self-interested. So that's why they have their inevitable clash. And boys will be boys. They'll fight, you know, in this case. But I love how the episode even introduces this so early with, you know, Don and Megan having that conversation where Megan's like, you need friends. Like, you need friends. You need a podcast, Don, is what she's trying to say. But, like, it's true because she even mentions it. She mentions it later. She's like, admit it. You had a great time. And Don doesn't want to be friends with people he works with. But who else is he going to be friends with? The people he swims with? Not going to happen.
I mean, it also happens with Lane and his wife. You know, she's like, you got to go to the pub, you know,
yes,
like make friends, even though he's thinking rather falsely that, you know, he's like, oh, like, my wife just wants to do this because she's too British. Yeah. But it's like, no, like, you're too busy being a work man, bud. Get, like, be at the pub, be with your
and
mates.
He listens to her and he decides, yeah, okay, I'm going to do that. And then he genuinely connects with somebody, or he thinks he does.
Yeah. I mean, I think he did initially.
Yeah.
And on the note, though, of, like, Lane wanting to feel important to the agency, too, you got to remember the baggage he probably has from his last agency that literally treated him like he didn't matter. And, like, he knew that, which is why he made this move to be useful, to be at this new place with his name on the door.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And these guys who I think that he generally started to have some real affection for, specifically Don. And I think that there's something to be said about Don's split loyalties here. I think Don really cares about Pete at this point. I think that that's a big reason why he's given him the stern looks. I think Don legitimately thought that Pete had grown up a little bit and that the two of them had a little bit more in common, right? But that's clearly not the case. I think that Don is kind of seeing his old self in Pete. He's seeing Pete go down the same path. And he's being extremely self-righteous about it. Absolutely. But I think at the same time, it's better than, I guess, the alternative, which is him kind of just, opening the door for Pete and encouraging him to walk through it. It's like a little bit of a tough love thing that I don't think Pete is equipped to handle, nor do I think Don is equipped to dish out.
I mean, one thing I do want to say as well that I think we've kind of alluded to but haven't said outright is that one thing I really love about this episode is that it frames Lane and Pete as kind of being equals in the respect that like they both are kind of searching for the same thing, which is, that sense of, not only kinship, but authority and feeling validated and feeling like themselves or feeling like they matter. Even to the point where I love that there's a shot in this episode where we find out that like Lane and Pete are like their offices are right next to each other, which may have been established before, but I'd never really thought about how close proximity they are to one another, even though they often feel like distant because we don't really see a lot of scenes with them interacting, one by one. So I think, if they had done like that fight scene, let's say in like the middle of like season 2 with Don and Pete, it would have been like more kind of like, yeah, woohoo, like Don's gonna finally beat Pete up. But like I think there's something about the scene that like it's funny, but it's also sad because like we've gotten to know both these characters and we know that like they're supposed to be kind of one and the same in some respects. So it doesn't feel like, oh, Pete or Lane's finally getting vindicated by, fucking Pete shit up. It's kind of like, oh no, like they're not growing progressively as characters. They're regressing. And now Pete's going to have to be sad in the elevator with Dawn. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And, I like how Don kind of acts in this episode where it feels like he's performing virtue to a certain extent, kind of like acting above it all. And I think that's the big reason why it's like, I think even Roger's a little bit like, okay, like we get it. You're in the honeymoon period. But it's an interesting time for Don. He's being pretty calm. He doesn't cheat. He's drinking a lot less than he was last season. He fixes the sink and has his big hero moment. And he opens up about the whole, like, growing up in a brothel thing to, a literal prostitute. And, we knew some of this already. It was revealed a few seasons ago. But I do think that there's something to be said about, how Don is like slowly kind of opening up to like letting in his old self a little bit more. There's the point where they mentioned a real life shooter whose last name is Whitman. It was like a Texas guy who shot a bunch of people. And when I think one of the characters says the name incorrectly, Don's like Whitman, and apparently, and Matthew Weiner was like, well, we had to do that. Of course, that name's going to stick out to Don. That's what Slattery said.
I love that. And I think, for as much as there's funny stuff in this episode, I think the hardest laugh I had was in that scene when like mid dinner, Megan remembers Ken's wife.
Cynthia.
She's
Cynthia.
like, Cynthia. And she's like,
what?
Yeah.
Don like goes to hug. He's like, hey, you.
Yeah.
It is funny, but I gotta say, that's suspended my disbelief more than anything else. You're telling me that Don Draper, one of the best creatives on the entire Madison Avenue, doesn't have like little things he can do to learn someone's name that he forgot? Like he doesn't have go-to tricks?
You would have to care.
I think,
or think that he's ever going to see them again.
For one,
well, no, I'm not saying to remember.
Clearly...
I'm saying to like when you see him face to face, like you think he would have like an opener.
Oh, I see.
To remind himself what it is.
Oh, it's you again. Oh, hello.
I think it's because Don's working at like 40% for the party, and also he's like,
he's a little
pretty
drunk.
Clearly shit face, So he's like, he's not like he's not fully on the prowl here. I think he's just kind of coasting. So
I want to ring the doorbell with my nose.
Right.
My chin.
Right. Well, for one, that incident, if people want to learn more about it, the shooter at the University of Texas, there's a great documentary called Tower that's done like a rotoscope fashion. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It's from 2016. Great movie. That was one of my favorite movies from that year.
Wow.
Really good documentary. But anyway, I was going to say, for one,
before you move off that, I do want to mention that I thought it was interesting. It's 2012, and they were talking about how this was coming out, or they were talking about this around the time the shooting happened in Aurora, Colorado. The shooting at the Dark Knight Rises. So it was an interesting, like how the timing of that was really eerie.
Oh yeah.
But sorry, just want to make sure I didn't forget to mention that.
No, I mean I'm sure that was on their mind because this came out in like 2013. This episode.
This came out 2012.
Okay.
So this was so it aired in April, and they're doing the commentaries for the DVDs later in the year. So yeah, at that point, the shooting had happened that summer. So after the airing, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, for one, I love Don's wife guy era. I think it's fantastic. I feel like I might be the biggest fan of that. In the
his
group.
what?
His wife guy era. He's just his
wife guy. Yeah, I was hearing the Spanish of Galleta, and I was like, wait, what? What are you talking about?
No, he's
his
wife
guy
era.
Yeah. He is.
He's like, I love my wife. I'm gonna have a sex dream where I choke a woman. I love her.
Well, he's in the state that Pete was in with Trudy, where they're living in Manhattan instead of the suburbs.
Right.
And that's why he's like to Megan, he's like, I don't want to go back to the suburbs. I left that life behind.
Yeah. And I think I love that scene in the brothel as well because it's also a good signifier of like how Lane, Roger, and Pete are like these boys, like just like, chasing tail basically and just trying to, get their rocks off. And Don's like the seasoned.
Well, Lane wasn't there. You're talking about Edwin?
Sorry, Edwin. Sorry, I was thinking of Edwin. Wait, Edwin? Oh yeah, no. So you're right. Yeah, no, Edwin. Yeah, you're right. The Ferrari guy.
Jaguar.
Yeah, sorry, Jaguar.
Matt Damon?
Yeah. Matt Damon.
Oh yeah, Christian Bale.
Yeah, Christian Bale. No, anyway, where was I? Oh,
Adam Driver.
Yes, Adam Driver. Yes, Ferrari, Michael Mann, Penelope Cruz. No, anyway, yeah, no, I just like that scene with him and the maitre d' of the brothel, and like they're just like older, like these two weathered people with a history that are just kind of just talking, not as like sexual conquest. There's like a little bit of flirting, but it's just like these like two people just being like, hey, we know how this business works. We're just kind of just shooting the shit, just having fun. Like I'm not trying to, loiter. I'm just going to have my drinks and just don't, make a fuss. And she's like, I respect you. Drinks on this man from me,
Yeah.
It's a nice
well, I think
moment.
he gave her advice. I think that the TV thing was like a battle that she had been waging where she was like undecided, and he helped kind of tip the scales for her. So I think she's appreciative.
She's like, should I move towards the future? He's like, no. Stay in the past because there's one thing.
I think practically though, like a TV is a bad idea in there because it's a little distracting from the business at hand, if you know what I mean.
I was gonna make a pretty good funny, I thought, where she was like, should I move into the future? No, stay in the past because there's one thing I, Don Draper, love more than anything. It's honoring the past and sticking with it.
Yeah. I did want to bring up Ken's sci-fi side hustle.
Oh yeah.
And it gets brought up at the dinner party thing. But he has the whole thing with Peggy where she kind of sees him and stuff. She has like a little bit of fun in this episode, but there's a whole thing where, he has like that publisher dude, great facial expressions. Kind of like what's going on, but he doesn't even say anything. But I like how Ken kind of goes to Peggy and kind of is like, that was super awkward. And he just kind of states it because like they're actually friends, so he can do that. And so it kind of shows you the difference between Peggy and Pete when it comes to Ken, like who he actually trusts and likes and appreciates. But I think like the whole thing with, because Golden Violin, I think was the last time we had some like kind of Ken Cosgrove storyteller stuff happening, because there was a big chunk of the show he wasn't in too after they moved.
Going from Golden Violin to a miniature orchestra.
Yeah, he has a thing for that kind of stuff, right? Well, he even says the whole subplot, of course, is like he's been writing sci-fi and fantasy, and it's clearly like, and they mentioned in the commentaries too, it's like a little bit of like Philip K. Dick inspired, and
probably Star Trek too, because that was the 60s, so I'm sure that was on his mind in some ways.
To some extent, I think that it's like a
Dune,
kind of a superficial. No, I think it's more Philip K. Dick, I think, in terms of like the theming and how it's presented. Myself, I personally would say.
I was saying more that sci-fi was becoming more.
Oh yeah.
That's my point. Not that his content or his writing, was becoming more. Like I think before, like he's still kind of embarrassed about it, but I think the fact that like sci-fi is becoming a little bit more normalized in the 60s from a public standpoint, like outside of like kitschy like 50s B movies and like stuff like that, I think maybe is what emboldened him a little bit to like speak about it at the dinner party besides his wife talking about it.
We're in the middle of the space race, right? Yeah. And and there's a huge interest. Watch Fly Me to the Moon starring Channing Tatum and Scarlett Johansson.
I forgot about that movie.
Yeah, most people did, but
Yeah.
not a bad movie. I kind of enjoyed it. But no, for real, I think that this is like peak like Martian kind of stuff too that was coming out. Isaac Asimov stuff was coming out. There was a lot of like really foundational, pun intended, sci-fi at this time. So then the story itself. I was curious about this, what you think, Mike, because I brought it up earlier, and I kind of want to set the stage here. Do you think the robot is Pete? You know, do you think it's Pete? Do you think it's Ken? Like, what do you think the intention is there?
I don't think it's that direct. I think the robot is just
Any
like
corporate
the
schmuck?
worker. Yeah,
Mm.
it's the corporate schmuck who's important enough to be there and have a job and have things to do, but not actually important enough to be at the top and be making the decisions, keep telling the robot what to do. I really don't think that Ken writes like very specifically about someone, which is why I think at the end it's like even more damning that he is very specifically writing about Pete. It's almost like he's like journaling,
Yeah.
like he's like writing in his own burn book, like this fugly ass.
Well, Aaron Stanton says like fiction in the commentary. He says fiction is the greatest place to hide truth, and yeah, if you actually like really listen to that story, it's clearly about Pete. You know, moving to the country, thinking that his fancy record player, it's a real hi-fi too. He thinks that's going to make him happy, but real beauty doesn't have that effect on him. And I also like where he tells Peggy, and there's this fun. Oh my gosh, I love when Peggy is just like that story where about the woman who lays eggs. Wow. Just great delivery. Elizabeth Moss. But no, when his new alias, he's like, he says, I'm done with all that fantasy stuff. Ben Hargrove is dead. But then he writes like a literary short story by Dave Algonquin. And it's, fantastic.
For as seemingly good as Ken is at writing fiction, he is horrible at writing names or pen names for himself. Ben Hargrove.
Well, I think so Aaron Stanton's kind of his theory on that, he was like, I think honestly, like Ken probably just wanted some of the letters of his name to be in there so he could feel proud of himself, like seeing the byline. But then by the time he gets to Dave Algonquin, he's just like, all right, I need to be more subtle because, like I have to, I don't want to get got. Maybe. I'm sure Cynthia got an earful of like, never bringing this stuff up again.
Mm-hmm. No, I do have to agree exactly with what Mike was saying, but I also think it's just funny that he goes to one dinner party with his frenemy and it's just like, look at this dumb dork bitch with his stupid record player and his sad life. I'm going to write about it with my wife.
Isn't there a joke from the dinner party about Algonquin? Like when he's telling the
Algonquin round table.
Sure.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's like, again, why I think wrote it.
The whole short story. Yeah. It has all these details from the dinner party. Yeah. So yeah, I just have some trivia and fun facts, and yeah, maybe a few of these things could spur a little bit more discussion because there's so much more to this episode. It's so layered. Like this is a tough one to do an episode because there's so many things we could talk about. But yeah, so I already mentioned this is John Slattery's third time directing, and we already talked about Frank Pierson. The episode was nearly called something else, but Weiner insisted on Signal 30 because to him it really is the theme of like this is a slow motion crash. Of not just Pete, but in terms of like a lot of these characters. John Slattery directed himself in like a lot more than he has in his other two episodes. And he had a hard time. He was like forgetting his lines because he was paying too much attention to the other actors. So he was talking about that a little bit, specifically in the scene he has with Lane, where he's giving him like sales lessons. Great scene. I love the way those two kind of interact and they kind of have like their playful banter. To the point where Roger literally calls him Heathcliff at one point. I love it. But yeah, and then the sink scene. So the toolbox that Pete uses actually belonged to Matthew Weiner's real grandfather, which I thought was really cool. And the exploding sink moment, it was all shot on the last day of production, and they could only do one take because everything got wet. So fortunately, you can't really tell. It's pretty seamless, and yeah, it's a fun scene to watch. Frank Pierson himself actually knew that the drip fix trick. So he was the one who kind of informed the whole setup of this because he was a handy guy. So he like knew how all this stuff works. So specifically turning the water pressure high enough could temporarily stop a leak. That's true. But it would eventually explode, which also mirrors Pete's psychological arc. So just to show you how Pierson was just such a fun writer, great with details. And then according to Weiner too, he said John Hamm fixing the sink in a t-shirt received a very strong reaction from women during the test screenings. So it's, I don't think we even have to point that out. I'm sure that's just fairly obvious on its face. When it comes to the fight, I found this really sad, actually. Jared Harris, when they were filming this, he actually had a slipped disc in his neck, and he had to do that whole thing. Yeah, it's kind of rough when you watch it in that context. It's like, oh, dang, like they really put him through it. But of course, he was game. The fight choreography included a subtle nod to multiple things. So you can kind of tell that Lane is doing the kind of classic British boxing, and then Pete's doing the more kind of modern American boxing. And there's a subtle nod here too, where in British boys' schools, they would teach students to tuck in their ties before fights to prevent your opponent from yanking them. So that's why he does that little thing there. So just nice little extra detail. They didn't use any stunt doubles for this. So that's really Pete who kind of takes that fall. He does a really good job too. It's very convincing. It looks like a Family Guy kind of fall, quite honestly, where Peter Griffin just kind of like, there is one quick shot though, where they had to use a stunt double though. Forgot to mention that. But otherwise, the actors actually took real hits. And Vincent Kartheiser insisted on showing Pete trying to maintain his dignity even in defeat. So he is kind of hoping that they're going to help him. But when he's on the ground, Kartheiser was like, no, he's going to say, I'm fine. And he's going to try to hold on to whatever masculinity he thinks he can get. And then Pete's line too about how Lane created a monster. It references a scene earlier in the series, which Jared Harris reminded Weiner of during the table read. So it was interesting because the commentaries talked a lot about the relationship between Pete and Lane. And at one point, I forget who said it, but I think it might've been Slattery or maybe it was Weiner, but somebody was basically saying that like, oh yeah, Lane was a big fan of Pete. He would prop Pete up and all this stuff. And I think that it's more nuanced than that, because technically Lane ended up choosing Ken for head of accounts, not Pete. So there's always been a bit of bitterness there. And I know that Pete for sure kind of looks at Lane a little, like I'm sure he's like held that against him, right? So I thought that was interesting, because there is that moment where Lane kind of says, oh, I always really liked you. So it's like, it's confusing, maybe it's one of those things where Lane just sincerely like likes Pete fine, but just thought Ken would be better for the job. And it was like not personal, but of course to Pete, it's going to be personal.
I mean, considering the kind of troubled paternal relationship that Lane has with his dad, it doesn't surprise me that he would have a troubled paternal relationship with his coworkers.
There you go. Right. Such a great episode too. I was thinking about you a lot during this episode, Mike, in terms of like, your work stuff and your life stuff and keeping those things separate, and how, especially in startup culture, it is so difficult for people to get that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I was thinking of myself a lot too while watching this episode for that exact reason. And again, it was especially like with the Pete like kind of through line of being at like another company, like feeling like you finally got put onto the team, feeling like you're doing something, and just being like, is this what it actually is? It's a lot. But something that we didn't touch on, I thought maybe we should at least mention, is the kiss between Lane and
Joan. Yeah.
Yes.
We haven't really talked a lot about Joan in this episode.
Yeah, I did have a little piece of trivia on that. And it was just that Weiner put in that whole thing where she opens the door. He said that he framed it in the sense of, if she locks the door, all good. If she opens the door, unlocks it, then that's the signal to Lane. And you see it on Lane's face where he doesn't know until, and then they also mentioned that Weiner was saying like, it's unclear to the audience, right? Like at first, how is she going to react? Is she going to lean into it, or is she going to kind of shut it down? And he said, you can tell the way she uses her hands that this was Christina Hendricks kind of signaling 30, that no, like this is not something that she wants.
I mean, I love the writing in this scene, and it feels like one of the most rewarding in the sense of this being a TV show, because you can tie this scene to like a couple others that I think Zoller Sites pointed out. Like there's a scene
set up,
like where Joan had to like comfort her roommate, and she kind of uses some of the similar language that she uses in the scene. But there's also like a moment, I forget when, might have been season 3, where Joan and Pete, or Joan and Lane, I mean, have like kind of like a heart to heart on the couch in a similar fashion. And obviously this one's a little bit more laced with like direct, like sexual attention, but yeah.
There was this season and the last season where I think like a few episodes ago, they had a heart to heart because she thought she had lost her job, being a mom. And Lane was kind of like, this office wouldn't run without you. Right. So they've clearly like, they've gotten on. And like, I think that's the payoff to him kind of, or this is the payoff when he tells her like, you could do this job. And I think he really means it, and I think there's something to be said. He's, he goes for the kiss. She shuts it down, but he doesn't get angry. He doesn't, do anything reckless about it. He's just kind of like, there's no end to my humiliation. But, he still kind of sees that like, all right, this person does care about me, but I think I went a little overboard here and didn't quite read the room, as it were.
Yeah. And also like that, because obviously like this is the episode right after the whole thing with Joan and her husband. And I like that the show establishes that like, all these other characters constantly bring their home baggage in a direct way or not into their work life. And Joan doesn't have that opportunity. Like she can't show her own troubles. Like she's going through it as much, if not more so than most of these other characters, but she doesn't have the avenues or options or, emotional availability to like express that anyway. She has to be the most professional person in the room, except when the boys want to fight, then she has to leave.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's such a good point. Glad you brought that up actually. Because she just, Joan clearly just is not as, she's not respected. She's not one of the boys, as it were, even though she is so essential to the whole operation there. For the dinner party. Oh no, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, I also love that the Joan Lane scene kind of mirrors in some fashion, like the Ken Peggy scene, like these two coworkers having a platonic kind of bond, two age generations, all that jazz.
Men and women can be friends. But I mean, even with Ken at the very beginning, he was, trying to like get with Peggy for like one episode and then he just stopped caring. And then they started getting along. Anyways, the dinner party, a lot of trivia with this one. So the set they used was actually a one-story ranch house. It was heavily dressed by Dan Bishop's team, and they tried to make it appear more upscale. So they put in the like fake balustrade ceiling to simulate it being like 2 stories. And then the whole like the sport coats being, they said that there's this old thing with advertisers. Real admin of the 60s would compete at parties to see who would have the loudest jacket. So you can kind of see that here. And we've seen a little bit of this starting to pop up more and more over the past 1 or 2 seasons. Alison Brie, who plays Trudy, she had to film all of her scenes in one day. And they kind of referenced because she had this other show that she had to work on. So the Community references will not cease. We just put out A Little Kiss, part 1, where we talked about Community quite a bit in that episode. I've forgotten.
Yeah, I mean, I do know that Dan Harmon has said that like they were very respectful of her commitment to Mad Men. Like they're big fans of that show, or this show, I should say.
They made fun of Mad Men quite a bit.
Yeah. But
in response.
But like I think the fact that they were willing to like open up her schedule, like obviously like there are tough things like her having to film all this in one day, but like the fact that Dan Harmon was a fan and like knew that she was, on this hit show, like other showrunners might have been more, prideful or stingy and been like, no, you're on our show, you can't be on that, and like had Pete get a divorce or something. But I appreciate that they kept their, they allowed her to do both.
Well, Dan Harmon, say what you will about Dan Harmon, but he has gone on to show that he is a much more consistent showrunner than Matthew Weiner.
Yeah, also someone obviously with troubled relationship with his female coworker.
There's a pattern here, isn't there? Right, yeah.
Poor Alison Brie.
Yeah, I know. Like she can't seem to catch a break, right? We'll just have to wait for whatever happens with Mark Maron to hit the. Anyway, so and I already mentioned the hi-fi stereo in Pete's house. It was fully functional as a prop, but Will Chamberlain was not inside, and I did double check that. But yeah, in turn, what other stuff did we have here? Yeah, they did say that they see the robot metaphor thing supposed to be Pete, a man consumed by professional duty but dead inside. And then Weiner, of course, joked that he was thinking about earlier in the series, season 1, they mentioned every ad man has 15 pages of a novel in their bottom drawer. So he kind of mentions that that's still kind of hanging in the ether, especially with the confrontation between Roger and Ken when he finds out what's going on. And there's a lot to be said about how Roger reacts to that, right? Roger's a bit jealous. He's a little bit like, my book didn't work out, fellow author. And it's like, okay, dude, yeah, but Ken actually could do this, like, for real.
Doesn't he like kind of put him down a little bit, like one failed author to another? When it's like Ken seems to be doing okay, for.
But I think he's hearing this secondhand from Pete. Pete probably said some stuff that was pretty, not favorable. But then also I think that that's my guess.
No,
you're being
I'm being sarcastic.
The final voiceover narration, Aaron Staton said, was his favorite line to record in the entire show so far. He described it as the smartest he's ever sounded because somebody else wrote it. with the Jaguar stuff, the fake British pub was actually filmed in Pasadena, but they kind of dressed it up a bit. The wooden ceiling beams were made out of styrofoam, but it was actually already part of the building before the crew arrived. So it worked out really well for them. Edwin Baker, who plays Lane's friend, the Jaguar guy, he is wearing a fake mustache, which was very expensive for them to do, but they insisted on it. I think Slattery said he insisted on it because they wanted to invoke like post-war British formality. But I think it was Slattery who said, honestly, it as an actor, like it helps help get you in character, and you lose some of your inhibitions when you have a mustache. So there you go. Both of you guys have beard/mustaches. I guess Will more so than Mike, because like a legit mustache.
I had to do like an intro to film course in high school, and we directed short films, and we had all these cops. And I remember one of my big directions was I need every cop to have a fake mustache. And it was like that's where most of the budget went, towards like buying a bunch of fake mustaches. But I like to think it also helped them in when they were doing their performances as fake cops.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. Pete does not have a driver's license, as is clearly established, right? And Weiner says this is a key symbol of how you know somebody is Manhattanite. The two baby twins who played Pete's daughter would only cry on camera, almost on cue, according to Vincent Kartheiser. Clearly embellishing, but yeah, the whole thing where the baby kind of comes in, is crying from the sink. It worked out, but they did not have to do anything to make the baby cry. As soon as they said action, the baby was just like, there you go.
This is probably a little mean to a baby. But when I saw that baby, it reminded me of the Twilight baby.
Wow.
You remember the...
Rough, dude. That's honestly the most fucked up thing you can say about it.
I'm not proud of it. I'm just saying that was my first thought when I saw that baby.
Now Mike is actually holding up his middle finger now.
Yeah, that's really messed up. That's the baby that made Don want to have a baby with Megan.
That's right. That's true. Weirdly enough. And then, yeah, Weiner did say, because Megan brings up like your accountant came to your birthday, and Don's like, he means a lot to me. Very funny line. But also, I think Weiner reminds the audience too. He's like, if it's not for that accountant, it wasn't for him, Don might not have been with Megan, because the accountant is the one who put the idea of hooking up with Megan in Don's head, according to Weiner. But I don't know. I don't know how much Don needed his accountant to point that out myself, but whatever.
Yeah, you're right, accountant. My secretary, she is pretty hot. Don Draper, I've never, ever considered doing this before. Maybe I'll sleep with her.
Sounds like the Californians SNL sketch. The Pete sadness thing at the end where he says, I have nothing. So that was in the script, and then they decided to take it out. But then not Kartheiser, but I think it was Weiner or Slattery. Somebody said, maybe it was Slattery. I need to keep this stuff straight. But Slattery basically was like, Kartheiser was like, keep this in and let's film it, because he said that it'll help him actually get emotional if he says it, which like, damn, Vincent, like, bro, you need some friends too, huh? He and Aaron get along though. They were kind of yucking it up together on the commentary.
I like the makeup for Lane and
good.
Pete post-fight.
Yeah.
It's
convincing.
They look pretty authentic, yeah.
Just a little bit more here. Yeah, I already mentioned the Joan thing. The final drip, drip, drip was part of the script from the beginning. Pretty clear, of course, the metaphor. We already got into that stuff. And then with the music, Beethoven's Ode to Joy was originally intended to score the final montage, but they ended up going with David Carbonara's original kind of version of it. But it was used for the credits. So the ending kind of has its big, ironic, emotional kind of thing because of the name of the short story. But also the whole thing with, like, Weiner even kind of says, he's like, the best thing about using Beethoven, the music, of course, it's some of the best music ever made, and it's in the public domain, so they don't have to pay for it. So there you go. And that's trivia.
Was it intentional for it to be like kind of like, you know, like Pete doesn't really know how to use his hands with the pipes, and then we see Don fingering Megan, and then also handsome fingering the high school.
I think you're onto something here, actually. Yeah, I like that. I don't
know if that was intentional or if that was just me reading into it.
It could be a fun. No, it could be intentional, or it could just be a fun coincidence. I like either interpretation. But okay, that'll do it for this week's episode of Mad Men. Next time we're going to be talking about Faraway Places, which is season 5, episode 6. So we'll be sure to talk about that soon. Thanks as always for listening, and don't forget that we are Mad Men, but more so, we are Mad Men friends.
I thought you were going to say Mad Men boys.